Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the People on the Go Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Melissa. I'm Online Community Manager at People on the Go, and I'll be moderating our webinar today. Now, before we begin, if we can just do a quick check to make sure that you can hear me and see the screen, that would be great. Thank you so much for those confirmations. I already start to see them come in there. By the way, that questions panel is the same one that we'll use for the Q&A at the end of the presentation, so just go ahead and give it a try right now. Great, thank you. If you are needing some assistance, the number to call is on the screen, 1-800-263-6317. We'll also be sending you a recording of the presentation after if you do experience any technical difficulties, and I'll also be on the line to help you as well. Today's webinar is Speak Like a Pro, practical tips to propel your confidence, delivery, and impact. And I have with me Jenny Blake, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. Now, just a quick background about why we have these sessions, especially for those of you who are with us for the first time. We have these sessions because our focus at People on the Go is productivity in the workplace. And the topics that you see on the screen are the many topics that we cover. We offer our workshops in a variety of formats, just like the webinar format, like today's session, which happens to be a popular format. Our webinars are offered on a monthly basis, and you can check them out on our website. We also have a membership plan, and you can see some of the different options there on the screen for you. Here also are some resources that are available to our People on the Go community. You can join our Facebook groups, our Facebook and LinkedIn group called Accomplishing More with Less. You can follow our founder, Pierre Khawand, on Twitter, and you can also check out our Less is More blog. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our speaker today. Jenny Blake is a blogger, author, business coach, international public speaker, and yoga teacher. She worked at Google for over 5 years in training, coaching, and career development. Prior to Google and halfway through her junior year at UCLA, Jenny took a leave of absence to help launch a political polling startup with her college professor and mentor. She returned to UCLA to finish in the spring of 2005, and the experience of leaving school inspired her to start a blog, lifeaftercollege.org. She then transitioned the blog into a best-selling book. Jenny is now providing business coaching services and courses at jennyblake.me, as well as continuing to add to her impressive public speaking resume. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Jenny.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. And thank you to everyone who is here with us this evening. Let me just take a moment here and get the presentation going. Okay, bear with me for just a moment. Okay, and Melissa, can you confirm which screen that you can see?
Sure, yeah. Yes, now it's in show mode.
Okay.
Great, Jenny, thank you.
Perfect, sure thing. All right, well, I'm so thrilled to have you all here today to learn how to speak like a pro. This is something that I've learned the hard way, and I think we all know the cliche that some people fear public speaking more than death. And you know, I think one thing that has been a mystery to me is why we feel like we need to be born with the Tony Robbins charisma gene. And instead, there are actually very practical things that you can do to improve your confidence and delivery, whether it's in a client meeting or on the big stage. How many of you listening have ever felt nervous before a speech, class presentation, or even an important meeting? You probably also felt like it was a personal shortcoming or flaw, that you could have done better if only you'd been born with this elusive gene that I've mentioned. And I can relate. I felt the same way. When I was 24 years old, I was delivering a pretty important presentation to a room full of senior level managers and directors at Google, which is where I worked at the time. I thought the meeting went well and that I delivered my content clearly, but afterward, my manager gave me some feedback. He said, "My message was solid, but my whole chest turned red while I was talking, which made me appear nervous." And the worst part was that the feedback had been passed down to him from one of the directors in the room as an area for development for me. So At first, I was fumingly angry. How dare they talk about a rash on my chest as professional feedback? And what are they doing looking there anyway? And then I felt deeply embarrassed because I couldn't deny that it was true. I felt betrayed by my own body. Here I was on the training and development team, and yet still in a high stakes situation. I have fair skin, my chest turned red. And the solution that my manager and I came up with was for me to wear turtlenecks. So for the next half dozen important speaking opportunities, I started wearing turtlenecks on days where I knew I would have an important meeting or training. And, in a way that was kind of ridiculous. I knew that there had to be a better way. I knew that turtlenecks were not going to be my solution for life, particularly if I saw a career in this someday. At that point, I picked up a book called Confessions of a Public Speaker by Scott Birkin. In this book, Scott talks about how he says, our brains, for all their wonders, identify the following 4 things as being very bad for our survival: standing alone, in open territory, with nowhere to hide, without a weapon, in front of a large crowd of creatures staring at you. He said, in the long history of all living things, any situation where all of the above were true would be very bad for you. It meant the odds were high that you would soon be attacked and eaten alive. Our ancestors, the ones that survived, developed a fear response to these situations. And just like this image from The Lion King, again, you're an animal alone on an open plain with no weapons, nowhere to hide, and dozens of eyeballs staring at you. Of course you're nervous. This is in our evolutionary biology, to feel terrified. And so what Birkin talks about, and what I really became a fan of, is that no matter how many times you've practiced, all the pros, everyone, it is the scientific fact that your body and brain will experience some kind of fear. And the question is really, how do you manage it? If you have felt those nerves, it means you're human. It actually means your body is doing its job. And so if you pretend that you have no fear of public speaking, you're actually denying yourself that very useful natural energy that your body is giving you. And that's what we're here to talk about today. There are several key aspects to nailing a speech, and it's not just what happens on the day of. True to most things, 90% of confidence comes from planning and preparation and everything that happens in advance. Since the time of my red rash days at Google, I have made a living as an author and a professional speaker, and I've spoken everywhere from TEDx, CMU, to Best Buy, Google, Yale, Parsons. And I have to tell you, I get nervous every single time, but I've learned the techniques for how to manage it. Today, we're going to talk about how to structure a speech effectively and define outcomes, how you want to influence your audience. We'll talk about how to prepare and practice effectively, the physiology, what happens when you're actually up on stage, and then how to nail your delivery. First up, define outcomes. Stephen Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says begin with the end in mind. There's no way you'll be successful with your speech if you haven't given any thought to what you want people to get out of it. Seth Godin says every presentation worth doing has just one purpose: to make change happen. No change, no point. Before, whether it's a client meeting or a big speech, it's really important to think about, what do you want people to walk away with? There's something we use in training and development called Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation. The first level is reaction. They call these smile sheets. Did they like it? If those of you watching this webinar smile at the end and you think, oh, that was nice, that would be a good level 1 reaction. Level 2, learning. Did you actually learn something new? If I were to quiz you on effective ways to practice, or what is Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation, that would be level 2 learning. Level 3 is behavior. It's one thing if you learn something new on this webinar, but I consider it that I have failed if you don't use anything or do anything differently. Level 4 is results. That's great. Okay, now you know how to deliver a speech effectively. Does it actually help? Whether your bottom line is client meetings or impacting an audience, does it affect the metrics that you care about? Level 5 is ROI. What's the return on investment? You're all taking an hour out of your lunch break to be here, and that's a collective, many, many hours among the whole group. So ideally, I can deliver some results that are going to be worth your time and then some. I encourage you to think about these 5 levels whenever you're crafting a speech or an important meeting. What do you want people, how do you want them to react? What do you want them to learn? Really key is how do you want to influence their behavior, and how will they benefit? What will the results be as a result of that behavior change? And, anytime we're giving a speech, if it is to change behavior, then the next question becomes, how do you structure what you're going to say so that you can influence that behavior change or inspire people or make a positive impact? The key here is to identify the gap and show the way forward. Nancy Duarte, who is one of my personal idols, who's written some fantastic books called Slideology, Resonate, and her new one, Slide Docs. She says the future isn't just a place you'll go, it's a place you will invent. And this is really key, even in the context of a sales meeting. You're saying to a client, here's where you are now, but imagine the possibilities. If you sign up with our service, you can have X, Y, Z, and I'm going to show you how to get there. Nancy has something she calls a spark line, and we're not going to go into this in super detail for today, but you can get her book Resonate, and this is actually available for free online. There are a couple key aspects of the spark line. Notice right here at the beginning, it starts with what is the audience member's current reality. Then you describe what could be. So I kind of did this at the beginning of this speech. I said, how many of you have felt nervous when speaking in front of others? And then I said, there is a better way. You can deliver, you can overcome those nerves and learn techniques. But now there's a gap. You're probably wondering, well, how do I do that? And that's what the speech then becomes. And so in the middle, you're really filling in and oscillating between what could be and what is, and you're giving some solutions. And then at the very end, you end the presentation on a higher plane than it began, with everyone understanding the reward in the future, the new bliss. You're saying to someone, this isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to practice and get in the trenches. But imagine you on stage feeling confident, delivering a speech that makes an impact. People are rushing up to you afterward to say thank you, or your clients are clamoring to sign up. And that's what the end is about. You're directing your speech in this really nice way toward that new bliss in the future. When it comes to writing an outline, I recommend doing a gap analysis. First, describe the gap. What is someone's current reality? And then connect with the vision of the way forward. Then you'll show them how to get there. When it comes to showing them how to get there, memory in threes is a very common thing. You don't have to only have 3 solutions for something, but it tends to work very well. We have 3 acts to a play. We have Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. We have stoplights that are red, yellow, and green. This is just something that we see consistently throughout society that can help people remember things. So when in doubt, when you're going to show a vision of the way forward, try and come up with 3 core pillars or techniques or strategies. And in this presentation today, I have 5. So I've broken the rules. But the drawback is it may be harder for you to remember what all 5 are. The power of stories. For each of your 3 sort of tactical pillars for how to get there, it can be very powerful to bring in a story. Storytelling is the oldest form of speech. It's what we've used to convey information since our caveman days. And so I recommend, some people even keep a tickler file of stories that they might be able to use someday. You can keep those in Evernote, for example. And these stories don't have to only be personal to you. It might be people who you interact with, or even celebrities who you observe. Any story that might be relevant to the point that you're trying to make. And then build in diversity. So even when you're outlining your speech, there are different learning styles, and we're going to come back to this on how adults learn. Some of you listening are more visual, some are more auditory learners, some are tactile and need to be really hands-on. Which brings me to interactivity. It's always good if you can build in some interactive exercises throughout a speech or a workshop. Today we're a little pressed for time. Normally when I do this speech, it's actually more like a workshop. And so people are getting to practice the different elements of how to really nail a speech. One thing that's important to know is attention span. If you look at this graph, you'll see that this is a graph of adult attention span. We have interest going up the y-axis and time across the x-axis. I want you to take a guess at how long you think that green bar is and the height of the peak. How many minutes do you think the true adult attention span is before it starts to decline? It typically is about 20 minutes, but I think we would all say that these days with technology, it can sometimes just be 5 minutes. Some of you right now have already gone to check your email. I may have lost you. Hopefully not. And I encourage you to tune in if so. But the point here is that you don't have a long time. You've got to really switch it up and keep it dynamic. Otherwise, people are going to get distracted or they're going to disengage. And so if you have a monotone delivery or a monotone arc to what you're doing, this attention span graph doesn't change. It's going to really decline once it peaks. You'll notice TED Talks are 18 minutes. It's actually perfect considering that the average peak here is 20 minutes. Just something to keep in mind as you build your speech. The next area is preparation and practice. Lock it in, move it out of your prefrontal cortex. Let's talk about what that means. When I got invited to speak at TEDxCMU, normally I was pretty used to winging things. I had done training so much at Google. I've trained over 1,000 people. And I got invited to kick off this TEDx Carnegie Mellon event. In the days leading up to it, I talked to one of the other speakers, Charlie, and he reminded me, he said, some of the best speakers who come across as the funniest and most relaxed on stage are actually the most rehearsed. And I thought, and he was telling me how he was recording himself over and over and getting all kinds of feedback. And I thought I should probably take this a little more seriously. So I started practicing too. I wrote out my whole speech. I was much more diligent and committed to practicing than I might have otherwise been. And when I showed up on the day of and I was that kickoff speaker, I was a couple minutes in and all of a sudden I realized the audience couldn't see my slides. And here I have a countdown timer counting down on my left. My slides are showing up in front of me on my right. This is ahead of me on the stage. And behind me, the audience couldn't see my slides. And when I kind of looked at the technical guys and I said out loud, "You can't see my slides, can you?" People shook their heads. Well, the technicians started freaking out. So they started moving things around. All of a sudden, I lost all my notes. I lost all my slides. And there was nothing but chaos happening behind the screen. Meanwhile, the countdown timer is still ticking down, 16 minutes, 15 minutes. And in that moment, I could either panic or continue. And thank goodness that I had prepared as much as I had, because I had to deliver the rest of my speech from memory while having all the distraction on the monitors. Thankfully, because I had practiced, I was able to continue and keep going. Otherwise, that would have been it. And I'll have you know that this speech is still recorded on YouTube and posted for the rest of time. And I knew that at the time as well. I knew that this was really my shot. So I can't emphasize enough how important preparation and practice is. And if you practice well, then you'll have that confidence when you show up on the day of that there's nothing you can't handle, even this. I love this quote: "Practice is the hardest part of learning, and training is the essence of transformation." It's really in the training, and it's how you train that's going to considerably move forward your delivery. A couple pointers. One, I always write a script first before I even make the slides. I type my whole speech out as if I'm telling this in a story. I do this in a Google Doc, and I can work things around, move things around, and not everyone likes to type things out verbatim, but I actually do. I find it very helpful to even type conversationally, to write out the stories. Then read it out loud. You want to hear how it sounds. You can also record using your phone and replay it, but go through it. Imagine that you were talking to someone was sitting right in front of you. How does it sound? Are there any awkward parts? Even better if you can recruit a friend or two to listen. Then and only then can you work on your visuals. Those should come last and be only to enhance. The key is to keep them clean and simple. I know you've probably by this point now all heard of the, kind of PowerPoint faux pas. But the idea is that you want your visuals to support what you're saying, not detract or distract from it. So particularly having too much text on a slide, people are going to spend their effort reading first, and they're not going to hear a word that you're saying while that's happening. That's why you'll see I'm using animations, so that at least it's one at a time. You can read it, I'll talk about it, and then we move on. The next part of practicing that I find very helpful is to print out the speech or send it to your iPad or device and do the walk and talk. I like walk and talk because there's movement. I get out of my house. I do live in New York. I can kind of talk to myself like a crazy person. But the point is that for a period of about 2 to 3 weeks leading up to a big event, I am actually practicing my speech out loud every day. Even if it's just one time that day, I'm locking into memory what it feels like, the flow, the content, the stories, and then I can wean myself off of my notes more and more as I go and repractice and refine one section at a time. The last step, practice cold. No slides, no notes. This I have added to my boot camp repertoire after that crazy TEDx experience. Even if you are going to have slides on the day of the event, it's far better to practice cold and come in knowing that you don't need them. That way you don't have to be carrying your notes on stage or glued to the lectern that's up there, or cranking your head back to see what's on your slides if you don't have a monitor in front of you. If you can practice cold, then on the day of, you'll feel really confident that you can move around the stage, engage with the audience, improvise, and then, hey, if you have notes or slides in front of you, even better. Above all, do not wait until the last minute. I cannot tell you how critical it is, and here's the brain science of why. So our prefrontal cortex is what's responsible for complex thought, decision-making, and executive function. And that is where our short-term working memory is stored. Just to give you an kind of description of the size, it's quite small relative to the rest of the brain. It actually takes up about 1 cubic foot compared to the rest of our brain, which would be the equivalent of the Milky Way galaxy. Our prefrontal cortex has a working memory of about 10 to 15 seconds or a 7-digit phone number. If you are trying to remember your entire speech at the last minute, you're relying on your prefrontal cortex and it is not going to be able to handle it. If it can barely do a 7-digit phone number, how is it going to do a 60-minute speech? And so it's really, really critical that you practice so that you can move this into your longer-term memory, which is usually found in the hippocampus. And that's what that repeated practice over time will do. Okay, I mentioned learning styles earlier. Part of preparation and practice is also how do you learn the best? If you're an auditory learner, you learn best by hearing. If you're a visual learner, you learn best by seeing. If you're a kinesthetic learner, you learn best by experiencing. And so when you're practicing, consider your own learning style. If you need to hear your speech every day instead of saying it out loud, or that needs to be part of your practice, by all means, record it and replay it. I find that typically a combination of all three is really what works best for me. The next portion is physiology. This is what's happening to your body during that fight or flight response that happens when you're on stage. And I know it's a cliche, but breathing truly is the best medicine for this. Edward Murrow has a quote, "The best speakers know enough to be scared. The only difference between the pros and the novices is that the pros have trained the butterflies to fly in formation." If you take nothing else away from today's webinar, I want it to be that if you get nervous, it is okay. You are human. This is not about removing nerves. It's just about knowing what to do with them and not getting freaked out when they show up. Here's what happens when your body goes into a fight or flight response. It's just like I said at the beginning, here you are, an animal on an open plain with nowhere to hide and dozens of eyeballs. Your body is understandably scared. And so what happens is your senses sharpen, your breath quickens, your heart beats faster, your adrenal glands are releasing cortisol and adrenaline, your muscles tighten, and your blood pressure rises. How many of you listening have felt this when you have to give an important presentation? I'm guessing many of you. And like I said, this happens to me every time. And I think one critical thing is that your body's creating extra chemicals. It's not just a mental thing. You actually have increased adrenaline and cortisol coursing through your veins. And so if you don't breathe and do muscle clenching, I'll talk about that in a minute, but physical exercises, then that energy is not going to have anywhere to go. And that's why we start shaking. If any of you have gotten shaky hands or a shaky voice, I'll get often a shaky leg like a dog where it's involuntary and my body is trying to get rid of this extra adrenaline. So it's actually very important that you learn some physical cues that you can do when this adrenaline starts coursing through you. One thing you can do is open and close your fists. Everyone can try this right now while you're listening. This is a good thing to do before you get on stage. You don't want to appear too nervous or anything when you're on stage. So open and close your fists. And that by clenching that muscle, you're sending your adrenaline into your body. You're giving it something to do. You can clench other muscles, namely your gluteus maximus. Your butt is one of your biggest muscles in your body. I think it is the biggest. And that's good if you're on stage, because as weird as it sounds for me to say this, no one can see if you're clenching your butt. But if you're having a shaky voice or shaky leg, you can really clench that muscle and, again, channel that adrenaline. You can also pace beforehand. This is that cliche of the actor or the speaker pacing backstage. The key is you don't want to pace on stage. I'm sure many of us have seen nervous speakers who end up running laps around the stage because, again, they have that energy and they don't know what to do with it. My trick is 3 deep yoga breaths before going on stage. And so you don't have to be a yoga lover. This doesn't have to be a woo-woo thing. Take 3 incredibly deep breaths. The way that you do the yoga breath, the ujjayi breathing, is actually by engaging the glottis muscles in the back of your throat. And so if you think of it like the sound you make when you open a can of Coke, it would be like, you can all try this right now. I'm the one with the mic on, but no one will hear you if you try. Another way to imagine how slow this is like you're fogging up a mirror and even counting to 3 or 5. So the sound of fogging up a mirror would be, normally you would do this with your mouth closed. And so you can kind of just close your eyes and let's all take 1 deep breath together. So you're going to inhale, 1, 2, 3, pause for breath at the top, and exhale, 1, 2, 3. Let's do 1 more deep breath. Inhale, 1, 2, 3. Pause for a breath at the top, and exhale, 3, 2, 1. Even just by doing that, you can feel there's a sense of calm that will come. And so sometimes even when someone's reading my bio, I'm seconds before going up on stage, I am breathing this way and no one needs to know about it. They can't see that I'm doing this, but I am taking very deep, slow breaths right down into the deepest part of your belly, all the way up through your glottis muscles, almost like you're threading a needle and sending the breath back down. Okay, now that we have all the prep, it's time for game day, delivery. There's a really fascinating story about President Obama during the 2012 election. It's from a New York Magazine article called The Intervention. And he was talking about how Obama had blown the first debate. And he was on the verge of blowing the second debate and risking his reelection. Some of you may remember this from his Colorado debate with Mitt Romney. And so in an excerpt from their new book, Double Down, the authors describe the moment when the president was talked away from the ledge. He was there with his team of advisors and his debate prep people, and he put his head in his hands and he said, I just don't know if I can do this. And everyone in the room was flabbergasted. Here is the POTUS. The President of the United States has been brought to his knees by a public speaking event and is saying, I just don't know if I can do this. The entire re-election was hanging in the balance for him because he didn't know if he could make it through the debate. So first of all, again, you're human. If President Obama is getting nervous, and the man that powerful is brought to his knees, he was already president, then no wonder all of us get nervous too. So what his advisors did was they created this tip sheet for him. They created debate on a page pointers that he brought with him to the lectern during the next debate. And I love these because they're so relevant to all of us. 1, speed kills. 2, upbeat and positive in tone. 3, passion for people and plans. 4, off the record mindset, have fun. 5, strong sentences to start and end. 6, engage the audience. And 7, don't chase rabbits. We don't need to go over all of these in detail, but you get the gist. Be upbeat. Have passion for what you're talking about. Have fun up there. If you're having fun, other people will too. Make sure to start strong and end strong. Practice those more than any other piece of your speech. It will be the most memorable. Engage the audience and don't chase rabbits. Don't follow too many tangents if you can help it. 5 common mistakes that I see people make are 1, filler words. And I'm guilty of this myself. I'm cringing as some filler words have come out even during today's webinar. We all probably have our own version of these. For some people, it's and when they're thinking instead of just pausing to think, or using the more drawn out filler words. A lot of people will start sentences unnecessarily with and 5 common mistakes, or so 5 common mistakes. These are all common filler words. Be aware, start to become an observer, even in your day-to-day communications. I use this as practice for myself. Even in the most casual conversations with friends, I'm constantly trying to eliminate my use of filler words because I know that will only help me when I'm on stage. Pace. Talking way too fast because you're really nervous, or talking so slow that it makes the audience uncomfortable. I couldn't even finish. So you want to really have a nice pace, not too fast. In fact, probably 1 beat slower than you might normally speak. Pacing, physically on the stage. Try not to be pacing back and forth, swaying. I'm guilty of the sway, or hand fidgeting. These are all things we're doing because we're nervous. Really try and plant your feet and be intentional about your movement. Tense, if you're just taking yourself too seriously. The key to remember is everyone in the audience wants you to succeed. They really do. They're not out to get you. And then lack of eye contact. Being buried in your notes or slides comes across as insecure or not knowledgeable, which I would imagine all of you would not be the case. How do we fix this? There are 5 solutions. For filler words, practice the pause. It helps add emphasis too. You can see that when I pause, it actually gives you time to catch up and really hear what I'm saying. Pace. Articulate your words. Speak 1 step slower than normal. Again, try recording a practice round. Pacing. Do your breathing exercises beforehand. Step with purpose and for impact. If you're feeling tense, smile. You'll trick yourself into feeling more confident. And it's that whole fake it till you make it vibe. Finally, eye contact. Try speaking to 1 person per point. Rather than feeling like your eyes need to constantly dart all around the room, 1 sentence, 1 person, or 1 point, 1 person, and really make an effort to connect. It's okay if you don't make it to everyone in the room. Okay, we have talked about today how to define outcomes, how to really get clear on what behavior or change or thing that you want to inspire in your audience. Then we talked about how to structure your speech to meet that aim, to really influence people and behavior change. We talked about how to prepare your speech and then practice effectively. We talked about the physiology of what to do with your nerves when you're on stage and beforehand. And then we talked about a few pointers for delivery. Now, if you only remember 1 thing from this webinar today, let it be, again, that we all get nervous. And the best thing you can do to combat that is begin with the end in mind and practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I'm going to go ahead and transition back to my slides, and then we'll go ahead and get to our Q&A. That was excellent. So everyone, if you have questions, do please start to ask them now, and we'll get to them in just a moment. A few reminders before we do. Here again is how you can connect with our community online. You can visit our blog and subscribe. You can join our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. They're called Accomplishing More with Less. And you can also follow our founder, Pierre Khawand, on Twitter. A special I'd like to tell you about today This is coming up in April in a couple weeks. You can receive 30 to 50% off our Creativity and Innovation webinar. This is taught by our faculty member, Daniel Guillory, who's also CEO of Innovations International. He's worked with some amazing companies such as Toyota and many others. There's information on our website here and registration info. I'm going to go ahead and send you the link now so you can access that at your convenience. And then I'd also like to tell you about a couple events coming up. We have a very special productivity webathon taking place April 9th and 16th. You have access to 20 different People on the Go webinars. They're condensed classes, only 30 minutes, and they're only $5.95 each. I'll go ahead and share that link with you as well. In addition, our upcoming long-form webinars, Microsoft PowerPoint Techniques, a good complement to this session today, April 9th, Business Email Writing, April 10th, Business Writing for Success, April 17th and 24th, and then Creating Compelling Presentations coming up in May. If you are already a member of People on the Go, please note that you already have access to these sessions. So please do visit your organization's website to sign up, or go ahead and check out our website and register today. And now for our Q&A. Great, we have a question here.
Fire away. If you have questions, okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. So we have a question here that's curious about how you prepared for that first big talk that you gave and how you prepare now. Is there a difference in your preparation?
There's really not a huge difference, actually. That worked so well, and under the craziest circumstances that I've stuck with it. I will say one key insider tip that I use is once I have written out the speech in a Google Doc, then I create the slides and I transfer that written speech into the slide notes in PowerPoint per each slide so that I get the timing right. Then in PowerPoint, you can print notes view. And what that does is it will print the slide on the top and the notes on the bottom half of the page. And I found that that's really great once I'm trying to lock in what stories go with each slide. And I will send that file to my iPad. I actually don't have a printer, but you can also print it out. Mm-hmm. But the point is that then I can walk around, or if I'm on the airplane on my way to an event, and I have that really handy slide plus the notes that I can flip through. And if I'm getting stuck anywhere, I can go back and reference what I'm supposed to be saying on that slide. So again, that's in PowerPoint. Once you have your notes in for each slide, you can go to print. And instead of printing handouts or slides, there's a drop down and you can print notes view. And I always save it as a PDF and send it to all my devices.
Great, thank you. So a lot of excellent questions coming in. Jenny, here's another one. Are you a fan of jokes to start or finish out a speech?
Absolutely. I'm doing a virtual conference for Entheos on this topic, how to speak like a pro. It's going to air in August, and I'm interviewing 25 thought leaders and authors and speakers. And one of them says he keeps a joke. He buys books on jokes, and he has a joke tickler file, and that he loves starting with a joke because it gets everyone warmed up. And even if it's something kind of self-depreciating, it's kind of a nice moment to get everyone feeling relaxed and connected. So yes, absolutely.
Right.
The funny thing is, on the day of my TEDx speech, I remember before I went on stage, I said, I need a joke. I don't have a good joke. Well, the joke was on me because the slides went out, and then I had to kind of wing it, and I was making some jokes with the audience, and in the end, it connected me to the audience so much more than if nothing had gone haywire.
I highly recommend watching that speech, by the way. I've watched it, and you do remain very calm, Jenny, despite all that's going on with the technical issues. Another question here is also about content. A lot of people tend to use big words in their speeches. Do you recommend this?
Not necessarily, only if you have to. I think what's so great now, we can watch things like TED Talks and really observe what works, what doesn't. Some of those speeches are very technical. These are scientists and researchers, but they still make an effort to make it very accessible. I think that's important. If you're using big language just to sound fancy, ditch it. I say better to be clear and direct. And I think the best writing and the best speaking is actually very relatable and easy to understand as far as the words themselves, but also be yourself. You know, you don't have to dumb your language down, but I'd say don't go out of your way to make it overly complex.
Right. And what do you do when you see, or if you see that the audience might be losing interest partway through your presentation?
That's an interesting one. It really depends on the format. If it's a day-long training, for example, there have been times where I say, you know what? It's after lunch. Let's take a coffee break. We'll be back in 5 minutes. You know, go get yourself some caffeine. Or sometimes if it's a workshop, I'll have everyone stand up and do a kind of group stretching exercise. Each person picks a different stretch and we all do it. If it's more of a keynote and you're losing people, that's a little harder because you're not necessarily going to stop in the middle and ask people to do something. And so in that case, you can also change your energy or change your pace or tone or improv and do a short break where you say, you know what, I'm going to stop for a second. Close your eyes and imagine. And then that's taking them into their own experience a little bit.
Great, thank you. And folks, I just want to let you know we will be posting a recording of this session in our Facebook and LinkedIn groups so you can access them there. And you should have already received the handouts. If you have not, I'm going to go ahead and share my email with you and you can be in touch with me and I will make sure that you get them. I'm just typing that now. Great. We'll go ahead and take just a few more questions. We don't want to go over too much today. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Jenny, do you happen to have any advice for non-native speakers?
Well, first, I commend and admire you. That's an extra challenge of not speaking in your first language. The advice, you know, it's, I think, very similar. You have even more on your mind. And so for you, I would say practicing is good and practicing with a friend, getting feedback, probably also writing it out is going to be very helpful for someone who English is not their first language, because then you can have someone read over your speech and just see for word usage and grammar and any kind of language things so that when you're practicing, you know you're practicing in a way that makes sense for the language that you're delivering in.
Great, thank you. And then you talked about the importance of preparation. Sometimes in a business setting, we might get called to give a presentation without much time to prepare for it. Do you have any suggestions on how to do that?
Yes, this is a great question. And a lot of times when I give this workshop, people will ask, well, what about that case where you get randomly called on in a meeting and you suddenly get very nervous and you don't have a lot of time to prepare? I think one thing that's critical is in those moments and you're feeling nervous, just don't freak out. I know that's easier said than done, but partly when it's for the moment, if you feel nerves coming on, just remember this is totally normal, as to be expected, and keep going and kind of breathe through it, or take a pause if you need to before speaking. And then if you have a little more time to prepare, just think about what is the one thing I care that people take away. Let's say you get asked to speak up at a staff meeting. It's in an hour, so you don't have much time to prepare or memorize. Just think, no matter what of everything I'm going to share, whatever data I'm going to present, what's the one thing I want people to remember or do as a result of me giving that presentation or even that short 5-minute overview? And that's really the key, because we usually don't convey information or speak if we aren't trying to inform or change behavior in some way.
Great, thank you, Jenny. And then the last question we have time for today is, do you have any tips for speaking to a younger audience?
Definitely. I would say all the more engagement is really good. Be active, have fun. I went to a workshop recently that Michael Port did. He has what he calls Think Big, Speak Easies, which is all about training for public speaking. And he did a great job. He was modeling for someone what it might be like to speak to a younger audience. And he got up and he sat on the edge of the stage. And he said, I'm just like you. He really related by just sitting there up on stage and talking to them on that level. And so I think also part of the message here is no matter who your audience is, experiment and try different things and also observe others who speak to a similar audience and see what really works for them.
Wonderful. Once more, here is Jenny's contact information if you'd like to get in touch with her and learn more. Jenny, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you all for your questions and for being with us today. When you exit the webinar, a feedback form will pop up, and if you could just take a few moments to fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you once more, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Melissa, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye, Jenny. Thanks.
Bye.